Hey, what's going on, everyone? Today we have a special treat. I'm going to be covering some of the set 17 comps that I think are pretty interesting to play around with. Whenever a new set comes out, it's good to learn a lot of the basic comps and just kind of learn the ins and outs of them just so we are prepared for when they come out on live servers. Keep in mind, there's no power levels or power rankings. It's just comps to try out that I think everyone should learn in order to set ourselves up best for the set release. Because pretty much every day during PBE, they're buffing and nerfing stuff. So any tier lists out there, first of all, who cares about climbing on a test realm? But also, the strength just changes every single day. So what I like to focus on when I play PBE is learning the basic comps so that I don't have to do that when the live set comes out. So we're going to be covering a couple of vertical comps and some reroll comps just to get myself and everyone started in our set 17 adventure. Let's kick it off with Twist of Fate reroll. This one is a 1-cost reroll comp. It focuses around Twist of Fate, Caitlyn, and then Jax, but you could also 3-star Aatrox and Talon if they are available. Pretty much, if you get the Medallion Stargazer constellation, it does make this comp into the S tier. And pretty much, if you don't know Stargazer yet, it's a trait that changes pretty much every single game, similar to Ionia from last set. Pretty much what the Medallion does is that it gives damage amp, and it increases for each 3-star ally. So we got a lot of 3-star allies here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So that's a lot of damage amp you're getting. That's why it's preferred to have it on that constellation, but not required by any means. But pretty much the Stargazers you're going to play are going to be Talon, Twist of Fate, and Jax. These three are going to be your main people. And then to finish off the comp, you're going to want, obviously, Fate Weaver with Twist of Fate. It is a Twist of Fate comp after all, so you got to pair that with Caitlyn. She's going to be one of the 1-cost Fate Weavers. So it makes a lot of sense to reroll them together, especially if you have the Medallion. And then because Jax is a Bastion, you want to pair him up with Bastions. Aatrox happens to be a 1-cost Bastion, so that makes a lot of sense. And he's also a Nova with Caitlyn, so you add in another Nova unit. That's going to be Kindred, but it really could be any one of them. And then lastly, it's nice to beef up your front line because you have a lot of damage dealers. So just getting in 4 Bastion makes a lot of sense. Ornn and Rammus are going to be the ones that you're going to go to, just because they're going to be a little bit one of the easier to access ones. Just because obviously getting 5 costs is going to be a bit trickier to do, especially when you're doing 1-cost reroll. You're getting a lot of them to 3-star, not just 1 or 2 of them. You typically don't get to reach those higher levels to unlock the higher cost units. So that's why it's kind of set up this way. There are a couple of other different versions with this, but pretty much you just want reroll augments to make this comp work. Like Prismatic Ticket makes this so much better because, well, you're just going for a lot of 3-star units. Champion Duplicators, while they are still useful, they aren't as good as stuff that gives you free rerolls because rerolls are just more valuable when you're going for a lot of different units, whereas duplicators are more valuable when you're just going for 1 or 2 units. But obviously, both are very useful because we can't handpick our augments, right? If we could do that, everyone would be Challenger, right? But unfortunately, that's not possible. But to play this comp, you want to play it from 5 or more natural Twist of Fate copies, or if you get the Medallion Stargazer, so those are the 2 conditions you need to reach. And pretty much Twist of Fate helps you farm a bunch of gold. So the sooner you hit him, the easier this comp is going to be. It's pretty much going to play itself, and you'll have tons of econs to 3-star everything. But during stage 1 and 2, you typically want to lose streak, and you could also play Time Breakers to generate rerolls if you get them. Pretty much Time Breakers just give you rerolls whenever you lose, so that's kind of like a nice combo to kind of have. Then on stage 3-1, you want to roll aggressively to upgrade your 1-cost units to at least 2-star. If not, get them to 3-star. What people like to do is they roll down to around 30-ish gold. Some people do 32. And then after that, you can econ back up and then slow roll until you hit everything 3-star. Then on stage 4-1, you have to all in and hit everything because at that point, you need to power spike and get your comp up and rolling. So that's pretty much the gist of how to play Twist of Fate reroll. Fun comp to play, 1-cost reroll. We haven't played those in a while. Like last set, I don't think there was a single 1-cost reroll comp that was viable for more than 1 patch. So hopefully this should be a nice thing to do there. Oh, also items. Twist of Fate already crits because they're Fate Weavers, same with Caitlyn. So you don't need Jeweled Gauntlet or IE on them. So stuff like Nashor's is really good because Nashor's complements critical strike chance really well by giving mana. And then Guardbreaker good. And then just general stats and utility, that's what you want on them. So Void Staff, you need a source of magic penetration. Caitlyn, stacking attack damage and attack speed makes perfect sense because, again, she already gets crit from the Fate Weaver buff. It's called, Precision, I believe, is a new name that they're giving it. And then tank items on Jax, just like any generic tank items will do. Then Thieves' Gloves is pretty good because you have, a bunch of random 3-star units like Talon and Aatrox, so you could just drop that on them. Or if you have, a lot of extra items, I don't know, maybe from, a God Reward or something like that, you can put it on them as well. But yeah, that's pretty much how this comp's going to run. Next up we have is Corki Riven. This is a fun comp to play, but this time you get to play it with Meeples. So we have Corki and Bard in the backline as our two Meeple carries, and it's fun to play around with these because they are the more expensive units. So this is going to be like a fast 8-ish comp, but it's mainly going to be Riven and Corki kind of duo carry. So Riven's kind of like your melee carry tank. Rammus is like your full tank, and then Corki in the back is just going to be your backline damage dealer, and then you top it off with Bard in the super late game. But this is one of those really nice 4-cost focused comps. But if anyone watched my set 17 preview video, you all know that I loved the old version of Riven, where she was a 4-cost and just bounced around everywhere and tanked everything and dealt a crap ton of damage. And that build is back. It's just Titans BT. That's kind of like the typical build for that. And I can't remember if Sterix Gauge even existed during that set. Was this like set 4 or 5 or something like that? I don't even remember which set it was, but it was like a very, very long time ago. It was Chrono Riven. But you paired her with a different 4-cost. Was it Corki at the time too? I remember it was a different 4-cost. It was like Riven plus someone else, and they both did some stuff. Memory's a little foggy. But pretty much the way this comp works is you want to fast 8, you want to play Rammus, Riven, and Corki, and then top it off in the late game with Bard and Shen. Shen's really good because he has this like sword that he spawns, and at the start of combat, it grants adjacent allies % max health and attack speed, which is obviously really, really, really nice, especially for Riven because she could use both stats. And it just gives you a lot of tankiness for your team. It works out because Bastion gives a lot of magic and armor resistance, and then Bulwark gives you a nice little health buff. So whenever you build a tank, you always want both health and resistances, and Shen's just like a free way to do that. So it's pretty much going to make Shen one of the best 5-cost units in the game, pretty much throughout the entirety of the set. But pretty much this comp is going to be mainly Meeples and Bastion, so that's going to be Poppy. She's a trait twin along with Rammus, so those two just go hand in hand together. And then obviously Corki and Bard are going to be the 4 and 5 cost units, so you pretty much have to include those. And then for the 5th Meeple, you want to use Fizz because he's going to be a rogue with Riven, so it's kind of like a no-brainer to play them together. After that, with Riven, she's going to be a time breaker, so you obviously want to play a time breaker. That's going to be Milio, just because Milio also gives Fate Weaver for Corki. So again, these two units, Riven and Milio, just perfectly complement the Meeple comp, and running them together pretty much makes like 100% sense. After that, you want to play some Bastions, and then Shen and Ornn just make a lot of sense. They're just like one of the more expensive ones, and that pretty much rounds out the comp. So what do you want for augments? Augments, the most important thing is just something that gets you to fast 8, because you have 3 4 costs that you want to get to 2-star as soon as possible. So any generic XP augment in the start of the game is going to help out a ton. Anything that helps you get 4 costs is going to be pretty good. Pretty much anything that gives you a nicer level 8 is going to be what you want to play for this comp for augments. So luckily for you, that's going to be like most of the augments in the game, because most of the game is played around level 8. But it's especially good for this comp because you're going for 3 of them. Most comps, they only go for like 2 4 costs, so they aren't as good, but this one definitely really enjoys that playstyle a lot more. But for items, unfortunately for this comp, you do need both magic and armor penetration just because Corki and Bard do different types of damage. But I like using Bard as a utility unit, just putting Morello and Void Staff on him. He has a decent AoE, so it makes a lot of sense on him. Corki, you need him to hold the Last Whisper for Riven, just because Riven needs very specific survivability items. After that, Corki does like to cast a bunch. He's like one of the AD caster units, so that's why you put a mana item on him, and then just some damage after that. Don't need IE because he is a Fate Weaver, so something like Striker's Flail is going to be more than enough for him. And yeah, that's pretty much how this is going to work. Rammus likes pretty much any tank item. I would prioritize his items last. You want to focus first on the Corki and Riven items. Just because tank items, you can kind of make whatever you can. But one other thing about this comp is that you do need a lot of items because you're itemizing like 3 to 4 different units. So getting an item augment early is pretty useful, both for win streaking and for just being able to cover everyone in the late game. So I'd say like the perfect setup might be something like slamming on 2-1, or like anything that gives you like the passive XP throughout the game. And then on stage 3, maybe an item augment, and then stage 4, combat augment. Maybe even more items on stage 4, depending on what you got before. But that'd probably be ideal for the setup just so that you get everyone up and going. But this is one of those good like standard TFT types of comps. So if you like that, definitely try out Corki Riven. The next comp I want you to try out is going to be 7 Shepherd. This is going to be the first vertical, like super vertical comp that we're going. This is with 7 Shepherd. And Shepherd is going to be the one that summons a unit. And by the way, I do know that we skipped over a bunch of the details. You could get all the details on bunnymuffins.lol/PBE. And then once this game does come out, it'll be on bunnymuffins.lol/meta. But this comp's very simple to play. You just click Shepherd and play all the Shepherd units. You do need the emblem to get the full power from this though, so just keep that in mind when you are playing this. The emblem's going to be made from Pan and Tier, but go into your team planner, put in all the Shepherd units, get the emblem, force this comp, and then the complementary units you want to add are going to be Leona, Mordekaiser, and Willem. Leona gives you Arbiter with Leblanc, who's going to be your primary carry at 4 costs. Mordekaiser is going to be a Vanguard Darkstar, along with Lysandra, who's also a Shepherd. And then Nunu's going to be your last Vanguard, and that's just because he is just going to be one of the better Vanguard units. You could also eventually add in Blitzcrank to this comp. He is another Vanguard, so that's another option you could kind of add in. But Nunu's good because he provides AoE CC, which is obviously very nice from a 4-cost tank. That's why you want Protector's Vow on him. It's a pretty nice item on him just so that he's able to cast a bunch. But in the backline, Leblanc and Sona are going to be your main damage dealers. Leblanc's got this nice little passive attack damage type of thing going on, so pretty much she deals magic damage based on her AP for her auto attacks. That's why Rage Blade's going to be really good on her, same with Archangel, so that she just becomes like that stacking, auto attacking carry in the backline, but instead of being attack damage, she's going to be ability power. Next up, we have is Sona. She's going to be your utility item holder, so Void Staff Morello going to be great on her. And then a mana item's pretty nice just so that she is able to get those casting instances off a bit more. But pretty much all you need for this is going to be the emblem, and that is built from Spatula. So I would recommend not going for this unless you have the emblem, because the comp is just like a bit worse without it. I'm not saying it's impossible to play with 5 Shepherd, but it definitely helps a lot more if you have 7. So pretty much for all your augments, you want to just try to get the ones that give you spatulas just so you could hard force this. And you also need the ability to go level 9 because Sona is needed for this comp, and it's hard to find her on level 8. And also because there are no more carousels, you can't like get 5-cost units off a carousel, so it's a bit tricky in that sense. Sometimes they offer you the unit that you want anyways, but remember pretty much in every other set in TFT, if you were loose streaking, you get first pick on carousel, and oftentimes the legendary you would want would be there, but that doesn't happen all the time anymore, just because they changed the mechanic from the carousel to the gods selection. But pretty much in stage 3, you want 3 Shepherd at least. In stage 4, you want to look to get to 5, ideally 7. So you don't necessarily need every Shepherd unit at the start of the game. You are able to kind of ease your way into this. For example, in the beginning of the game, you don't need to run like Meepsy, Teemo, and Lysandra, because in this set, you always have the option of playing something like Time Breakers just to get your econ generation going. So Time Breakers is pretty much like Bard from last set. It just gives you a bunch of extra rerolls if you lose and gives you XP if you win. Pretty much any comp can play from Time Breakers. So whether you're fast aiding or rerolling, it's going to be one of the options there. But yeah, pretty easy vertical comp, get the emblem, and then go for this, and going to be pretty powerful with the summon unit that they get. Next up we have is a Vanguard Karma LeBlanc build. This one's going to be pretty similar to the last comp we saw, just because it's played around like Shepherds and LeBlanc. But instead of going 7 Shepherd, you're just going 3. So I guess you could flex between the two, but you always want like the 4 Vanguard out there, just because they are pretty solid units, and you need frontline eventually, right? So if you are ever in a position where you get a lot of AP carry items, this is going to be one of the comps that you want to go for, just because LeBlanc and Karma are able to be played together because both their frontline tanks are Vanguard. So Mordekaiser, Leona, and Alawi are all Vanguard units that share traits with LeBlanc and Karma. And then Meepsy also gives Voyager to Karma as well. So you have a lot of complementary units between these two traits, or between these two units indirectly. So that's kind of why they can be paired together. But one important thing to note is that the Arbiter you get matters a lot. You want to get an AP or attack speed generating Arbiter for this comp to work, just because you're playing around LeBlanc, and that's the stats that she wants. But another good thing about this comp is that you could play it either from win or loss streak as long as you have the correct items, which is going to be Gwynsu's and Jeweled Gauntlet. Because if you have those 2 items and you get the champions, that's pretty much the most important things to have for them. The rest of the items, while they do matter, obviously, they're not as important for this comp. Another thing you want to pay attention to is getting a strong front line. LeBlanc is a stacking champion with these items, so you definitely need strong front line. That's why we run 4 Vanguard. And there are different tank front lines that kind of play with this. It's just that I list this one out because 4 Vanguard is the simplest one to play with. But there definitely are stronger boards than this if you are able to get to the super late game. So definitely, if you're playing this and you're in like stage 6 or something like that, and you get a bunch of legendary units that are really good, definitely switch onto them. instead of running some of these very cheap cost units. But playing this comp is pretty simple. Like, I'm making it sound more complicated than it is. You just play your strongest board early game with a Gwinsu Slam, or you can lose streak with an Econ Augment or playing with Time Breakers. And then you continue building Karma and LeBlanc's items, and then on stage 4-2, level up to level 8, roll down for them, see what happens, and then look for a time to go level 9, and then roll down there and play around your legendaries. Another thing you need to do is kind of adapt to whatever arbiters you get. I know I use the A word. A lot of people don't like the A word, but yeah, you need to adapt to what you get. So if you get like a lot of one stat, you want the other stat from your items, right? So for example, if you get an attack speed arbiter, Archangels is going to be more worth it than Rageblade if you need to decide to build between the two, right? Like if you have a Rod and you get a component anvil and you're like, should I build Rageblade or Archangels? It's really going to depend on what arbiter you have. And pretty much if you get AP, you want Rageblade. If you get AS, you want Archangels. But yeah, that's pretty much what this comp is. Like the core is just like 3 Shepherd with Karma and 2 Arbiters. And the front line can be pretty much like anything else. There's like some stuff listed down here, but the Vanguard one is going to be the quote unquote like base one that you're going to be rolling down for. And then you could pivot into something later on. By the way, for Arbiter, like I'm doing a decision between AP and AS because we're building around LeBlanc. Right now, the Shielding Arbiter is like really OP on PBE, but no one's playing it because they know it's going to get banned. But I just want to make that note out there for everyone. Like, if you really want to win your PBE game, like, yeah, go the Shielding one. But in the in-houses that people play, like, it usually is banned to take it, just because it's bad to practice with something that probably will be nerfed in the future. Next build up we have is Psionic Yi. This is another vertical comp, but one of the smaller ones. So Psionic is just going to be a 2 and 4 trait. Psionic is a trait that gives you the Psionic items. We can pretty much see a list of them when we go down here. Those are the ones where we can go down here, and they're in the other section right now. Pretty much each of these items show who they're recommended on, but Target Lock Optics is going to be one of the ideal ones for Master Yi. This is the item that gives them additional damage on their first attack against someone. But Master Yi's build is a little bit interesting. He is a Psionic and Marauder. So we already talked about Psionic. Marauder is pretty much just like the melee carry trait. Your team gains Omnivamp and Marauders gain more, and their overhealing is converted into a shield. So pretty much what that means is that you don't have to build healing items on Master Yi. Like obviously they do help, but because you have a Psionic item for damage, you want Titans for him to kind of stack up. And he also gains Omnivamp from his ability a bit. You don't need healing items for Master Yi. So that's why I kind of like something like Edge of Night. It gives him both attack speed and the invulnerability thing. Not invulnerability, but the untargetable effect. So it gives him like a lot of uptime and allows him to stack his Titan's Resolve so that he could kind of go infinite throughout the fight. But pretty much for this comp, you always want 2 sets of melee carry items. One goes on Yi, one goes on Fiora. Instead of Fiora, because she is a 5-cost unit, it could just be any Marauder that you're using to complement Yi with in the early to mid game. And then after that, in terms of item priorities, you want to just have Even Shroud, just so Master Yi and Fiora can do a little bit of extra damage because of the armor shredding. But the tricky part about this comp is that it's pretty expensive. You may have noticed already, we have 1, 2, 3, 4 different 5-cost units, and then 3 4-costs. That's a pretty pricey comp. So what you need is access to level 9, and to do that, you need either a lot of econ augments, or you need to have like a pretty big win streak in the early game. So if you win streak in the early game, let's say you took some item augments to do that with, you're able to save a lot of your HP, and then kind of greed later on in the game to get to level 9. Greed meaning saving up gold and putting it into XP instead of rolling down aggressively to stabilize. But luckily for you all, we do have the game plan down here. The only real requirement is having like an AD Psionic item. It doesn't have to be the Target Lock Optics, but it is the best one in my opinion right now. But if you don't have one at all, then you can't really play this comp because you can't play around Master Yi. But in the early game, you want to check that item just to make sure. Play your strongest AD opener. Do the same thing in stage 3, and then on stage 4, roll down at level 8 for Yi, 4 Psionic, and Tahm Kench, and then play those plus whatever legendaries you get. Pretty much the core of this comp is just 4 Psionic, 2 Brawler, 2 Marauder, and that's pretty much just how you play around Master Yi and Tahm Kench. Then after that, find a time to go level 9, roll down for the rest of the 5-cost, Fiora being the most important one, and then by that point, the game should be over, especially if you get the 5-cost units to 2-star. But this is one of those good melee carry comps if you like playing those. I personally like these a lot. I like Riven a bit more, just because I think the unit's ability is a little cooler, but I mean, if they give me a Master Yi game, I'm going to play Master Yi. Next up we have is the Meeple Veigar comp. This is a 3-star Veigar comp that doesn't need to reroll, because you get to duplicate champions with the cloning hex. So pretty much with Meeples, you get a cloning spot on your bench, and you get a 1-cost copy of the champion placed there when the cloning completes. So every round, you get 1 gold of like value to that cloning spot. So with Veigar, you get 1 gold every single turn, so you can get a new copy of him pretty much all the time. However, if you do something more expensive, it's going to take longer because if you put a 5 cost there, it's going to take 5 turns. But pretty much the magic rule is just have 4 copies of Veigar. That way it makes it much easier to get everything in the later parts of the game. So the biggest game plan is reaching 7 Meeple with as much HP as possible and then cloning Veigar as many times as you can. You pretty much do not want to spend any gold rolling for him because he's the only 1 cost 3 star that you need. So in the beginning, play your strongest AP opener, ideally Veigar and 2 Replicator. Keep doing that in stage 3. Getting access to level 7 in stage 3 is possible, but it is quite rare. So in most games, you are probably going to get it only in stage 4. But if you happen to get lucky and get access to 7 on stage 3, level up to level 7 and you just start farming the copies instantly. But if not, just do it on stage 4. And then eventually, you will get Veigar 3, drop down to 5 Meeple, and then play some of the legendary units as per usual. So legendary units can be Shen, Morgana, Bard, and Jhin in this comp. They give a mix of both damage and tankiness. And pretty much for items for Veigar, he's going to use the double Nashor's Jeweled Gauntlet build. I'm surprised they haven't nerfed this yet. Maybe they have, or they will later, because it's just like a very weird item combination. Like when you're playing AP, do you ever think that you want double bow, double belt? Not really, right? In fact, you might need triple bow and belt because you need to build Void Staff and Morello also. So it's like, what items are you supposed to prioritize when that's the case, right? Normally for AP, I would assume you want stuff like Rod and like Tier, but this build doesn't use too many of them. Like I know Bard does, but like for your primary carry, it's a little counterintuitive, right? But looking back at this comp, the Meeples you want to play in the late game are Bard, Rammus, Meepsy, Gnar, and Veigar. So pretty much like Poppy and Fizz and Corki, while you do need them to get to 7 Meeples early on in the game, you do end up dropping them. Good news is that Corki is a pretty good item holder for your AD items that you will eventually put on Jhin. But pretty much all the AP and tank items, you already have item holders for them. That's going to be just Veigar and Rammus. But yeah, fun comp to play. It's one of those reroll comps that aren't actually a reroll comp. They seem to be adding a lot of those in the recent sets. Last set, it was Bilgewater with the 3 cost units. But this time they have like this cool cloning thing that you could use like a 1 cost reroll without actually rerolling for it. Next comp up we have is the Mecha comp. The Mecha comp is pretty interesting because you can play around with jumping up and down between extra units and fewer units. So in case you didn't know, Mechas, they can either take up 1 or 2 unit slots and you could decide that yourself. And when they take up 2, they contribute 2 to the Mecha trait. So there is like a typo right now. It should be 6 Mecha instead of 3 because you're going to be doubling up on all your mech units, Urgot, the Mighty Mech, and Aesol. And pretty much what that's going to do is give you an extra unit slot at 6 Mecha, so it allows you to kind of fit a lot of stuff on your team. When you get Aesol, though, and you have items on him, you always want to activate the 2x bonus right away, or like the transform bonus. So I guess in the early and mid game for Mecha, like the general rule of thumb is upgrade them if they either have items or are 2-star. The only time I wouldn't upgrade a mech into their ultimate form is when I have nothing going for them, and maybe I'm in the middle of transitioning my board, waiting for some of the other ones or waiting on specific items. But pretty much the board looks something like this. All 3 mechs, when upgraded, take up 5 unit slots because you get an extra 1 from 6 mecha. So you could get this board on level 8 with these 6 units out there. Just keep in mind, when you do upgrade your mechs, they do change their abilities. For example, like Aesol, he stops auto-attacking when he's upgraded, so do not build stuff like Spear Shojin or Nashors on him. Build what you're seeing here instead. Jeweled Gauntlet, Archangels, and Void Staff. It gives a mix of AP and crit, and obviously Void Staff's very useful whenever your primary damage dealer is going to be AP. And then for the Mighty Mech, just give him like the frontline AD bruiser items, Sterak's, Titan's, Bloodthirster. And then because Urgot is a brawler, you could play Tahm Kench, which is really nice because he's just a solid 4-cost unit, and pretty much you're always going for 4 costs in this comp. So that way you could put a bunch of generic tank items onto your Tahm Kench. Then lastly, you could get Master Yi and Victor and get a tank item, because pretty much you could get the tank item on the mech, which is very, very strong, or get an AP item for Aesol. But pretty much if your thinking cap is on, you'll realize something already, and that is we want to concentrate a lot of power into our units because they pretty much count for 2 of them. So Aesol and the Mighty Mech, they like a lot of the very powerful items such as like artifacts and radiant items. So that's kind of why Psionic works out pretty decently, because it's just a way to get extra power concentrated on the only 2 units that we care about. And another thing that makes a lot of sense is playing for something like Reinforcement. Reinforcement is really good because it just gives you 2 4-cost units instead of 1 of them, because if you get like Aesol, you get him 2-star and then you make him take up 2 unit slots. it's kind of like getting a 2-for-1 deal. So duplicators kind of do the same thing. Like when you duplicate a 4-cost champion and you get them 2-star, like you get 2 slots on your team that are just like super upgraded. It kind of reminds me of Annie from last set, where she gives you Annie and Tibbers. So if you upgrade her to 2-star, it's just worth more than 2-starring literally anything else. So that's why this comp works out pretty nicely. It's fun to play because you could like play around with upping and downing the mechs. But at the end of the day, it is just going to be a level 8 comp because you don't really need legendaries for this. So a small XP augment, then some item augments is going to be the ideal way to kind of play this. Next comp we have up is going to be the MF Reroll comp. So MF is the pick your own trait type of champion. So she could choose between Conduit, Challenger, and Replicator. Just keep in mind they renamed Challenger to Conduit. So that's why you see Conduit here, like we're going to add it in later. But Channeler does not exist anymore. But in this build, we're going to be running Misfortune with a bunch of tanks in the front line and 3-starring pretty much everything. So Ross is very interesting because he is going to be the unit that gives you Stand United for your whole team. So he's really nice to have in comps that have a lot of different traits. He's also a 3-cost unit that you could reroll with Misfortune very easily. Malachi going to be very solid because he's going to be part of your front line. Same with Ornn. They're Bastion and Brawler, so you could pair them up with some other units there. And then lastly, we're going to be running Victor as he's another conduit unit to play with MF. So he's going to work out really well with Gragas to give you Psionic, who also gives you Brawler for Malachi. And then Aatrox is going to be a Nova that's going to give you Bastion with Ornn. So that's kind of why this comp was set up the way it is. It's just a standard 3-cost reroll comp, so you do want an augment that gives you a lot of rolls because you want as many 3-star 3-costs as possible. In terms of psionic items, the drone uplink is really good on Victor. A drone repeats 25% of the damage from the holder's attacks and abilities to the same target every 3 seconds. In this comp, since you're dealing 2 types of damage, you need both Armor Shred and Magic Shred, so that's why you have the Void Staff on Victor and the Even Shroud on your Ornn. But pretty much this comp is just 3-cost bonanza. MF likes mana item plus crit. Victor just wants some AP stuff. It depends on what psionic item you get, honestly. And then Ornn just wants your utility item. So that's going to be the Even Shroud and the Sunfire Cape, then some random tank item. On the other 3-star units, you could put like a Thieves' Gloves on them. Probably not a bad idea. You want to focus on these 3 units first. But that's a conduit version. In the replicator version, this one is going to have MF casting twice. This time she's going to be paired up with Riven, but you still have Malachi and Ross and Aatrox in the comp from before. But instead of the other units that we had, we're going to add in Shen, Gwen, and Pantheon. Shen and Riven just work out really well together because Shen's sword just makes Riven really tanky, which allows her to kind of carry you into the late game. But in this comp, you still want a bunch of 3-star 3-costs. Adding in the 4-costs definitely does help as like a secondary carry. So instead of doing like super reroll, this one's only like regular reroll. So choosing between these 2 comps is going to depend both on your items and on what augments you're getting. So if you have like Prismatic Ticket, you probably want to do the Conduit version. If you don't, probably going to do the Replicator version. If you have melee items, you want to do the Replicator version. If you have a lot of AP items, you want to do the Conduit version. But pretty much at all times, you want 2 carries. It just kind of depends what life gives you that game. But very simple comp to play, just like standard 3-cost reroll. Next one up we have is Rogue Reroll. This one's going to be built around Kai'Sa and Fizz. And then we also have Ornn as the 3-cost tank. So if you haven't noticed yet, like a lot of these 3-cost rerolls, they share a lot of the same units, which is a bit unfortunate. So you can't simply just scout like, oh, I'm going Kai'Sa or other people going Kai'Sa. You also have to pay attention to Ornn because I'm pretty sure Ornn is played in both of these. So just be wary of that because having a main tank is still very important. Like obviously you could get away with having a 2-star Rammus as your main tank, but it's easier just to get the 3-cost rerolls going, you know? But this comp luckily uses the same items as Misfortune. It's just mana item plus crit. Tank items are the same, and then Fizz just likes a lot of the crit melee items that also heal him. So like Handed Justice, Jeweled Gauntlet, Nashers. It's a weird item combo. We haven't really built it before. Obviously, different stuff works on Fizz, but I think this build has been working out pretty decently so far. Another thing to note is that you may have noticed in all these builds so far, Ross is 3-starred, but he also doesn't have items. The reason why you want to 3-star him is because the higher star level he is, the more bonuses you get from his Redeemer trait. So that's kind of why you want to get him up there. It is expensive and he will be contested, so don't like grief your game to get him, but don't ignore him either. But yeah, reroll is pretty standard. You want to get to level 7 as efficiently as possible, then roll down for 2-star of your 3-cost units. You ideally want 1 damage dealer 2-star and 1 tank 2-star. At that point in the game, it's usually around stage 3-5 where you hit level 7. You don't have enough items for all 3 units, so you just want to focus on 2 of them and then find the 3rd unit later on. And then after that, once you stabilize, you want to ideally win those rounds because you stabilize and then econ back up to above 50 gold. then slowly roll down every single turn down to 50 until you find a good time to all in for your units. Another thing to note is that lose streaking is pretty important in this comp, not only because you could play time breakers, but because of the way the comeback mechanic works. On neutral rounds, you'll get more item anvils or component anvils, so you're able to hand pick your items a lot better. And this comp does need pretty specific items, so it is something to be wary about, where lose streaking is pretty important for this comp. Last comp up we have is going to be Primordian Reroll. This one is going to be 1 and 2 cost focus, where Primordians, they deal a bunch of damage, but they also like give you random 1 and 2 cost champions. So it's a pretty nice econ trait to run in the beginning of the game, but it also is just really good as a comp on its own. Pretty much Briar, Rek'Sai, Bel'Veth, those are going to be the 3 Primordian champions, and then you could complement it really easily with Akali. The reason why is because you have Marauder with Bel'Veth and Akali as a pair together, so that's kind of a no-brainer to kind of pair up. Next up, you want to run Challengers, so Kindred's going to be a pretty good candidate for that. You get her at 4 costs, but she's going to complement your Bel'Veth. You could play any Challenger before that, so it could be something like Jinx or Diana, but you do have a lot of carries in this comp. You don't have to itemize all of them. I'd focus on the reroll ones first, but if you are able to make it to the late game, this is kind of how you cap it out later on. But in the beginning, you just want to focus on all the attack speed items for Bel'Veth and the melee items for Akali. After that, prioritize the Rek'Sai items. So Bel'Veth, I'd say like Quicksilver is pretty much mandatory. You just need uptime on Bel'Veth. If not, she kind of sucks. And then Kraken's really good as one of those stacking items. Akali, you want the Edge of Night so that she doesn't get popped randomly. And then Hand of Justice is good for some healing. Keep in mind, because you are running Novas, you don't need critical strike chance on Akali. I mean, you do want it, but you don't need to like build an Infinity Edge to make her ability crit, because she gives all your allies precision. And you also don't need Shred and Sunder in this build because it's also built into Nova. So whenever you play this comp, you do save yourself a bunch of items, which makes building it a bit trickier than what we are used to in the past. But overall, I like this Nova trait a lot. It's pretty fun to play around with. It pretty much allows you to build item combos that you typically haven't built in the past before, which I think is great. But these are just some of the comps that I found decent play with on PBE. It's not tiered. Again, it's not sorted by power. It's just comps that I think will be around when the set releases, because pretty much like all the vertical traits, they are going to be existing when the set comes out. It's really well worth it to kind of learn them because you will eventually play them at some point. A lot of the reroll comps, especially like Primordian, like, are you going to think that they're not going to make specifically one reroll trait unplayable the whole set? Like, no way, right? So that's why it's important to like learn that one. Stuff like Mecha is very static as well. That's one of the verticals. So pretty much all the comps here, there is a reason to learn them. It's not like one of those very specific PBE comps that they're going to nerf and you're probably never going to play again. I tried my best to like avoid that. That's why during the Arbiter comp, I did not talk about the shielding one until the very end, because most likely the way this is going to play out is that you want the AP or AS one and kind of hand tailor your unit after that with the item build. So I'm doing a little bit of like deeper thinking. Maybe I'm like completely crazy, but I always try to think about what Riot wants us to do when they make stuff. And then I know that's how they're going to change their patch notes in the future. Like, I'm not right on this all the time, but for the most part, like, it's worked out better than just like blindly copying whatever everyone else is playing right now and practicing that during PBE, because I did that like in the very early sets and I learned very quickly that like these comps just get nerfed, you know? Like there's an Abomination comp that was absolutely bonkers busted. I think this was set 5 or something like that, and like I was playing it a bunch and I was like, oh, I learned all the ins and outs of it, and then they just like completely changed the trait and how it worked, and I was like, oh, I just wasted all my time. So whenever I design these like PBE comps to try, I'm trying to pick comps that I think will be played in the future based on the information we have from the set so far. So hopefully that's kind of the approach that everyone else has taken, because like obviously we want to play on the real patch. A lot of you don't even play on the PBE server, but if you are able to try it out, these are the comps that I am recommending, because you probably will be playing them on the live server sometime during the set. But that's going to be it for me today. Hopefully you all enjoyed this video. Again, this is bunnymuffins.lol/PBE. The regular tier list is still updated for set 16 if you want to do a last minute climb, so that definitely is still there on bunnymuffins.lol/meta. And obviously we'll be switching over onto the new set when it comes out. I think it comes out on the Wednesday of next week, and we'll be having a lot of guides during that time. So definitely look out for that. Subscribe if you have not already, and I'll see you all in the next one.